Dun, dun, dun. Here we are. This wonderful, wonderful good news of God. And we think to ourselves, really? Really? This is the good news of God that we are invited to hear and participate in? If you are like me, you get to that last line and all you see is kind of orange and flames and little people up on stage going, Ganache, Ganache, Ganache. This idea of this one servant, this one slave being sent, cast out into outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. We hear that last line, and we completely tune out most everything that has gone before it. Or if we've been really attentive, we take that last line and we reflect back on this wonderful reading from Zephaniah about this God who is vengeful and the challenges of the people not living faithfully, and how every inhabitant of creation will be wiped out, destroyed. And all of a sudden we're left sitting here thinking, why did I come to church today? To hear what we proclaim as good news about this one who is so mean and vengeful and hurtful. And if there's no hope for that one servant, or all of the people of Jerusalem, or any inhabitant of creation, then what's the deal with me? And why would my life be any different? Why should I try it? Throw in the towel now, be done with it all. We are so colored by these phrases and these texts that make us feel worthless, unworthy, frustrated. And we wonder, God, what are you really doing with this text? And God, what are you really doing with us? As we come to this text, however, I'd like for us to pause for a moment. You see, this parable, which is often called the parable of the talents, is found in two of the Gospels. In the Gospel of Matthew and in the Gospel of Luke. Interestingly, however, each has a slightly different take. Luke tells the story after the story of Zacchaeus, this tax collector who has been corrupt and filled with wrongdoing, who after his encounter with Jesus goes and sells and gives back. It is about an economic change of heart. It is a way about living differently, about being transformed in an economic world. His vision and his economy has changed. Matthew, however, places this parable of the talents in a very different place. It is after the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, the waving of palm branches, the laying of cloaks on the ground. It is Jesus teaching and talking about the challenges of the world and of, as we see it, the end times. When all will be shaken up and the world will be differently. And it is right before Jesus is anointed and then gathers with his disciple in the meal of the Passover, of liberation. It is also just before Jesus is taken to the cross, dies, and experiences outer darkness himself, who goes to that place where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. And it is that lens that I want to reframe this part of the story today. Alongside that, the story of these three servants. When we focus on this last one, you see, Jesus has had run-in after run-in after run-in with the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees. We know this every week For the last month and a half, we have heard him being tested and questioned and pushed and prodded. And now all of a sudden there's this story about the end times that I think is really picking our brain and saying, do you get it? Do you get it? You see, Jesus has gone out, eating with prostitutes, tax collectors, shaking things up in the social establishment, challenging people to live in new ways and be renewed people. And imagine with me for a second what it means if you are a tax collector, a prostitute, a sinner of the nth degree, and you have one who comes into your life saying, God has abundant grace and mercy for you. God has abundant grace and mercy for you. You have those 5 outstanding sins. But you know what? Let me give you something to cover, to change, to challenge. What happens when that person feels liberated? To live in a new and profound way. What happens when you are the person where God has doled out unexpected grace and mercy? Do you go out into the world and become one who starts trading in grace and mercy? Who proclaims that there is grace and mercy for others? And all of a sudden there's a multiplication of how that commodity in our capitalist world becomes abundant, multiplied, manifold, not just for one, but for many. Or what happens if you have received grace or mercy twofold, and it really strikes your heart, and you go out and you decide you are going to do something with that, to testify, to share, to let others know that there is grace and mercy for them. That they are invited into this, and they start trading and dealing with grace and mercy in an incredible, unbelievable way. And find that this twofold grace and mercy has been multiplied 2 times over. But then what happens if you're that one? You know, or you think you know, what God is like. God reaps where God did not sow. God gleans, picks up where God did not scatter the seed. Probably 80 years ago, this text would have been preached very differently in this very sanctuary, with a whole lot more fire and brimstone and some hand-hitting on the pulpit to go with it. But what happens? What happens when we recognize that this is a different framing of this God and a different framing of our lives? You see, in this text, this one servant, this one slave, says to God, or the master, that I know this is what you are like. And there's almost a question coming back, saying, you knew? You really knew that that's what I am like? Is there a presupposition there that is completely off base? Is our vision of God that narrow? That God is a God of vengefulness, of plucking and sowing, where God didn't plant or make things known? What happens when we reframe that and we realize that, in a sense, we are being put on trial? We are being challenged because too often we put on our blinders of what God is like and who God is.